Gerard Testigan said this. He says, a comprehended God is no God at all. Okay, so I want us to start there because listen, each of us have a preconceived idea who our God is, and we all, let's just put this individual, we all have little boxes we like to fit our God in. You can't fit God in a box. Not possible. So we're going to start there. And it's only as, listen to me carefully, it's only as God reveals himself to us that we begin to get an accurate picture of who he really is. And that revelation of how God chooses to reveal himself to us comes in three primary ways. He reveals himself to us through creation, through Jesus, and through the scriptures. In creation, have you ever gone for a walk in the mountains or by a river and trees or on a beach and you watched a sunset and you just felt closer to God? You just had this, like, you get into nature and you're like, wow. Like, you ever been in a place on the planet where you're just like in awe and you felt closer to God? The psalmist said that creation cries out and tells us that there is a God. That's why people feel that. Like, God reveals himself to us through creation. And we're part of that revelation, by the way. We're part of his creation. God also reveals himself through Jesus, and we'll look at that a little bit later in the series. But God reveals himself through Scripture. And that's where we kind of want to dive in a little bit today, is dive into how he reveals himself to us through Scripture. Okay, and we can see this because there's so much, and we're going to go through scriptures quickly, and I encourage you to take notes and write down the references in particular and go and do this study yourself, because it's interesting how God reveals himself to us through scripture and kind of progressive from the beginning to the end of the book. It's kind of progressive how he does it. So let's start at the very beginning. Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God. First four words in the Bible reveal a little bit about who our God is. In the beginning, God. What do these four words reveal about our God? These four words reveal about our God. Number one, he is uncreated. In the beginning, before God. Like in the beginning, God was already there. In the beginning, God. The psalmist said it this way in Psalm 90 verse 2. Before the mountains were born, or you brought forth the whole world. Look at this. Before the mountains were born, you brought forth the whole world. From everlasting to everlasting, you are God. In other words, you are eternal. From everlasting to everlasting, before God. Paul said this in Colossians. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Okay, this is vital for us to understand. It's obviously important that we understand that our God is uncreated, because even Paul, writing to the church in Colossae, he made it a point of saying our God was there before all things. This is important. Back to Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God, the next word, created the heavens and the earth. In the beginning, God created. So God is uncreated, but God is also the creator. Okay, this is vital. The Hebrew word, or God reveals himself through the Hebrew and the Greek, and there's a number of names that are attributed to God. Names that, like, in our English Bibles, we see God or Lord, and that's the extent of our English understanding of God. We can capture, that's why many of us in the Western world don't fully grasp who our God is, and why I'm teaching this is because, but in the Hebrew, in particular, there's multiple names of God, and each name reveals a little bit about who he is. So God the Creator, in Hebrew, the name for God the Creator is Elohim. Okay, and Elohim, God the Creator, that name is used 35 times in Genesis 1:1 to Genesis 2 verse 4. So in one chapter, plus 4 verses, the name Elohim, or God the Creator, is used 35 times. In other words, Moses, when writing this, or the author of Genesis, when writing, this creation story, made sure that 35 times emphasizing, God is the creator. Okay, and there's other scriptures that point back to, many scriptures that point back to God being the creator. In this is Nehemiah 9, verse 6. It says, you alone are the Lord. You made the heavens, even the highest heavens, and all of their starry hosts, the earth and all that is in it, the seas and all that is in them. You give life to everything, and the multitudes of heavens worship you. So Elohim, God the creator, is possessor and ruler of the heavens and the earth. He brings light out of darkness, cosmos out of chaos, habitation out of desolation, and life is in his image. This is our God. This is important. This is important to the early church in the book of Acts. Verse 17, or chapter 17, the book of Acts is a historical account of the first century church. Okay, the birth of the church right after Jesus resurrected, and Peter and John and Paul and all the early church leaders formed the church, and they began to teach. And in that teaching, Acts 17, it was important to the early church that they understood that God is Elohim, God is the creator. And here's what they said in Acts 17 verse 24. They said this: the God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord, okay, ruler of heaven and on earth, and does not live in temples built by human hands. There's so much in that verse. By the way, there's so much in that verse. They're trying to make a point that God's presence does not dwell in a building more than anywhere else. Come on, we need to understand that. Does not live in temples is a way of saying that because God created all things, he is omnipresent. Okay, omnipresent means he is everywhere. That means, by the way, that you don't have to wait to connect with God to come to a building. That means that you don't have to wait to pray for God to minister to you and wait for a pastor in a building at the front of the building to get an answer or breakthrough. Our God is not confined to a space. He is omnipresent. And the fact that he is creator, that he is everywhere, that he created all these things, points to the fact and alludes to the fact that God is omnipresent. It alludes to so much more. He is everywhere, as Paul said it in Ephesians 4, verse 6. He says, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. He is over all, not just the pastors, through all, not just church leaders, and in all, that's all of us. Because we're part of his creation. Paul said in Colossians 1, verse 16, he says, for in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities or prime ministers or presidents or, okay. All things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together.